So I'm very pleased to welcome you all to this Aspect workshop this afternoon on how social scientists engage business. Let's say that again, how can social scientists engage business effectively? It's a question. As part of the Aspect annual event series, and that's been running about halfway through. So it's been running in September and it runs up through to the end of October. So you might have already been to some of the workshops and there's certainly some more coming up. So have a look on the Aspect website. So welcome to any more people who are just joining us. I can see some people are still putting into the chat. Another person from the KTP, that's great. So welcome all. So as I said, you can hear us, we can't see you. So please use that chat box as much as you would like. And I'm going to ask you give you some prompts to ask questions. So ask questions of the panel anytime you like, and I will read them out to the panel. So I'll try and monitor everything. I might not read your question out immediately. And I will also ask you some very specific questions at the end, and that is to the audience. So just bear with me, and I will now introduce the panel. So without any further ado, it's my great pleasure to welcome our panel to this session. So with us today, we have Sam Collier. Give us a little wave, please, Sam. So that's Sam Collier, who is a PhD student at the University of Bristol. We have Mary Wakeham, who is also a PhD student. Mary, gets a little wave. Hi, Mary. And we have Colin Nolden, who is a Vice-Chancellor's Fellow. That is our panel today. I'm your chair for today. So just briefly introduce myself. I'm Ruth Welters. I'm the Business Engagement Coordinator for the Faculty of Social Sciences and Law at the University of Bristol. And so next, I would very much like to ask each of our panel to introduce themselves, just to tell you a little bit more about themselves. And just before I do that, I will say that each of our panel have been invited because they are involved in a current piece of funding, which is from the ESRC, Economic and Social Research Council. And we all refer to it by an acronym. So I'm going to tell you what that acronym is now in case we keep referring it to it. The acronym is ABC, and it stands for Accelerating Business Collaboration. It's just the title of that particular piece of funding. So if you hear us talking about ABC as a shorthand, it's just the sort of funding stream for those projects. So Sam, if I could hand over to you, and if you would like to tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your current projects.
Hi, thanks, Ruth. Yeah, so my name's Sam Collier. I'm a PhD student, as we said, in the School of Geographical Sciences at the University of Bristol. My PhD looks at the uptake of residential solar PV, so that's solar panels, mostly kind of rooftop panels, across England and Wales, with a focus on the city of Bristol in the context of trying to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2030. My ABC project is with a business called HomeLink. They work in IoT, it's Internet of Things, in social housing. And the project looks at kind of ethical approaches towards IoT and social homes, acceptability of those technologies by organizations and residents. Yeah, the key output from it will be some recommendations for an ethical framework for the sector.
That's great. Thank you so much, Sam. And we look forward to hearing a bit more about that later on. So now I'd like to invite Mary, if you could also introduce yourself. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruth. Yeah, I'm Mary Wakeham. I'm a PhD student in the Centre for Gender and Violence Research at Bristol University. So my PhD is exploring animal abuse in the context of domestic violence and abuse. I'm coming to the end of my PhD. My Accelerating Business Collaboration is a great opportunity for me to share my findings. I'm working with a lady colleague called Wendy Snedden, who's an HR consultant and a member of the Links group, and we're collaborating to produce resources for vets to help raise awareness about the link between domestic abuse and animal abuse.
That's great, thank you, Mary. And again, we look forward to hearing more from you in a bit later. So last but not least, Colin, if you could also introduce yourself. Thank you.
Hi there, my name is Colin Nolden. I'm a Vice Chancellor's Fellow at the Law School at the University of Bristol, and I'm a researcher at the Environmental Change Institute at the University of Oxford. At the University of Bristol, I'm involved in research on sustainable energy governance at the intersection of energy demand, mobility and climate change and communities. And at the University of Oxford, I'm researching the politics of energy demand as part of the Centre for Research into Energy Demand Solutions. As part of this ABC funding, Accelerating Business Collaboration funding, I'm working with several community energy organisations, South East London Community Energy, Energise Sussex Coast and Community Energy South. And we're looking at company data ranging back 10 years to establish what kind of fuel poverty alleviation and support by these community organisations has worked, what hasn't worked, and this is ultimately to provide recommendations to funders in terms of what can be funded, but also to determine how these organisations can provide better support in a future which is ravaged by fuel poverty as a result of COVID-19.
Fantastic, thanks so much. So all the participants, hopefully you can see that we've got a very interesting mix of people here on our panel with some very different research expertise areas and some very different companies that they're working with. And because these projects are all live, I'm hoping that we're going to have some very interesting discussions today. So to go back to our main theme, so the question is, how can social scientists engage business effectively? So amongst us, we've come up with 3 principles to focus on. And in a moment, I'm just going to ask the panel to give us their thoughts on each of those principles that we've picked. But actually, who are we to say what the best ways are? So I will also put that back to you participants, because I know you've got a wealth of expertise. So I look forward to hearing what you think are your principles as well later on. And remember, again, just throw in questions anytime, as soon as you think of them, throw in the questions and I'll keep them to the end of each speaker, and we'll put those questions to them. Okay, so the first principle we're going to start with is what we're calling, for want of a better phrase, alignment of opportunity. So Sam is going to talk about this one first. So Sam, in my experience, often I see a new opportunity coming for a university to work with a business is often opened up by a funding opportunity. But of course, there's a lot more to it than that. So Sam, it'd be great if you could tell us a bit more about your thoughts on this from your business experiences.
Yeah, of course. And yeah, as you mentioned, funding is a very important element in my experience. It was the facilitator for my initial, the start of the relationship with HomeLink. So yeah, so it enables the collaboration to happen. And kind of shows the value that the researcher can bring to the business in financial terms. Funding opportunity is kind of the catalyst for the collaboration. So if that funding isn't available, it makes it a lot harder for those projects to work. But it isn't the only thing that makes these things work. I've kind of thought about, what happened before my collaboration, what's happened during it, and what might happen afterwards. So then I'm going to kind of come up with 3 kind of ideas about this alignment of opportunity. So firstly, the initial collaboration came through a PhD innovation placement, whereby social science researchers can seek out opportunities with, in my case, was a technology company, but other firms who are doing, businesses who are doing innovative work, might be social innovation. And through that, I was funded to work with HomeLink by the ESRC. Basically, the way we made this work there was that HomeLink and me had a conversation. We said, what skills can I bring to them? What issue do they need working on? And there's this alignment between the two. This, it has to, if it hadn't happened, if it hadn't worked properly, and if I didn't have those skills to match with HomeLink, then it wouldn't have been a match. And it has to be timely, both for the researcher and for the business as well. So at the time, HomeLink didn't have the resources to do this work themselves. So this funding enabled that work to be carried out by someone else, and for me, gave me an opportunity to work with a private sector business, and also an opportunity to practice some of my research skills, refine them more for my own benefit, for my personal research. One really important part of the work I've done with them so far is what I'm kind of terming a lack of rigidity in the structure of the opportunity. So what I mean by that is, don't make it too academic, don't make it too commercial. There needs to be a crossover, and there needs to be shared benefits. So it needs to be useful for the academic, for the researcher, but also for the business. So there needs to be an alignment of the output, and it needs to be consistent to be valuable for both parties. Subsequently, so what I've mentioned so far has kind of been part of my placement, but we're now discussing the Accelerating Business Collaboration funding. So I've actually progressed my work with HomeLink through this extra funding pot. The way that happened really was that I didn't only work on the project that we had discussed originally. I was able to kind of communicate to HomeLink other skills that I had, and they were able to identify other, that my skills were valuable for them, and how they might be able to, work with me in other ways beyond the original research project. So this other kind of idea I've come up with is explore these opportunities for further collaboration. So collaboration can spin off into further collaboration, and it almost as a further catalyst for that. Yes, so we've got these three before, during, after. Match the opportunities and the skills of the researcher and the business, avoid the rigidity and the structure of the opportunity to keep it, along the line so it's valuable for both parties, and then keep your mind open for those opportunities for further collaboration and opportunities where you might not have previously seen that there was, that collaborative opportunity.
Thank you, really interesting points there. So I'd like to offer now an opportunity back to the participants. We have 52 of you, so somebody must have a burning question to put to Sam. So please, I know it takes a little moment to type in the box, so we'll just be patient. Please, if you have a question for Sam, please use the chat to put your question. That'll be, everyone can see that question then. We'll ask Sam to answer it. Whilst everybody is thinking of a question, I'm going to also put a question back to you participants, because Sam, you said something which I thought was fantastic, the way you encapsulated a project or a collaboration that's not too academic and not too commercial. And I think that's really hard to get right. And obviously a business will have one perspective, and a university will naturally have a different perspective. So business people, I know we've got some business people on this workshop here. If you're a business person, please type yes in the chat box if you've ever been approached by university with a project that is too academic in your perspective. So I'm just interested to see where the balance of this lies. And I hope the chat is working. Here we go, we have a question. Excellent. So please, we will respond to this question, but also please, businesses, if you've ever been approached by a university with a question that you feel is too academic, yes or no? Okay, here are some questions coming in for you, Sam. This is related to what we've just saying. So Sam, how did you manage to get the balance right in terms of the language, not too commercial and not too academic?
Mm-hmm. So the way I did it was working, and the way we did it really was working closely with the business HomeLink to kind of mediate that. Fortunately, one of the team at HomeLink have gone through academia. They have a PhD, and they are kind of the kind of what's the word? They're the person who deals with the kind of crossover between academic and commercial. They use quite a lot of academic research in their work, and they translate it into into the insights that they develop for social homes. So there was already a platform to do that, I guess. But I think you're not alone in putting together either the application or any of the projects, any of the documents that you put together whilst doing those research projects. So just speak with the business and ask them to read through it, and you know, there will be a way to find that happy medium.
Thank you. And we've got some lovely questions coming in. So Natalie, I haven't missed your question. I'm going to keep that to the end. So Sam, next question. So how did you manage to fit the collaboration into the likely immense amount of work you do on your PhD research?
Mm-hmm. So the collaboration was funded by my PhD funders, the ASRC. So I was able to pause my PhD for the period of the collaboration. Doesn't mean I stopped thinking about my PhD. It doesn't mean that I didn't have that kind of constant background guilt of not doing any PhD research. But yeah, fortunately, I was given that extended period to carry out the work.
Brilliant. And this is another good question. So what support did you get from the university to help you with this?
Yeah, so I guess the major assistance was, you know, the application process and the encouragement to kind of go for the opportunity. HomeLink, I believe they contacted the university, so we kind of got put together through the university, but a member of the doctoral training partnership was really helpful in kind of looking through my application, you know, being there as a mediator if required in meetings, and then Ruth, you yourself subsequently for the ABC project have filled a similar role, just offering advice when needed, and somewhere just to ask the questions that you kind of come up with that you probably wouldn't have anywhere else to go to if you didn't have those people.
Yeah, exactly. It shows that there's a lot of work involved, isn't there, to get that alignment of opportunity to make something happen from it. So another question to you, Sam, which I think is, let me just check. I think this is the last one for the moment. So what do you see will happen after the project with this?
So hopefully we can come up with some viable recommendations for influencing the ethical rollout of IoT in social homes. There's lots of benefits from this kind of technology, but we need to get it right and not kind of have an unfair distribution of these benefits where, you know, social landlords might make cost savings at the expense of tenant privacy, for example. So hopefully we can get some viable recommendations, as I say. Beyond that, I mean, I've got quite a healthy relationship with HomeLink. I've been building a wider network in kind of an industry where I haven't had any experience prior to this. So I feel like opportunities might come up there. I don't know yet, I'm not sure, but I feel like it's kind of broadened my opportunities and shown that actually taking the chance on these funding opportunities is worthwhile. So if other opportunities came up as well, I kind of have learned the process and understand what it takes to be part of a collaboration with a business. So if opportunities aren't there, I've still kind of had that experience, and it's I recommend it to anyone.
Oh, fantastic, thank you. So thanks for sharing some of your insights, and obviously we can come back to you later. But for the moment, I'd like to now take our second principle, so a bit of a different perspective, which I'm calling alignment of purpose. And Mary's going to speak about this in just a moment. So it's really come from me, one of the things that I've noticed working in the social sciences, perhaps more so than science, so some people might argue differently, is it does seem to me that social scientists really look for people to work with that share their own sense of personal motivation and purpose. So Mary, it'd be great if you could tell us a little bit more about your current project and why you chose to work with that particular company.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've worked in the field of domestic violence and abuse for quite some time now, and I've been studying at the University of Bristol for 5 years. So like I said, I'm just coming to the end of my PhD. Alongside my academic studies, I also set up a charity in 2017, and that charity provides a pet fostering service to victims of domestic abuse when they need to escape, so when they need to go to refuge or emergency accommodation. So this is a real passion of mine. So the work that I do along with the charity, my academic studies, and now my collaboration with Wendy. So I'm really lucky that over sort of the last 5 years, I've really met some inspirational people, Wendy being one of those people. So it made sense really, although it was slightly challenging to begin with, because when I think about sharing my findings or collaborating with organisations, typically given my topic, which is domestic violence and abuse, I might think of a charity first and foremost. So I had to really think about this collaboration and how it could work. And, you know, once I got talking to some of my contacts, and Wendy said, well, you know, I'm an HR consultant, I'm a business, I want to develop this work with vet practitioners. So it made sense. We developed the collaboration from there. So just to explain a little bit more about what we're doing. So Wendy and I are working together. She's an expert in terms of working with vet practices. She's been doing it for many, many years. She knows how they operate. She's a veterinary nurse. She trained as a veterinary nurse. And, you know, my expertise lies in the field of domestic violence and abuse. So we're both learning from each other. And we're creating website content, practice guides, a short film, training materials. And this is all based on the existing resources that Wendy's got, and adding to that with the findings from my research. So why it works so well is that alignment of principles. We're both we're really passionate about what we're doing, and ethically and in terms of our own moral principles, they're very much aligned. So that's what's making this collaboration such a success. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That's very interesting. I think that's interesting, the way you expressed both that sort of passion that you both have, but also that ability to share, that you've both got expertise and that you're both learning from each other. I think that's, yeah, that must be, well, what a great collaboration that you've got there. Again, I'm going to invite all our participants to put some questions to Mary, so please type them into the chat box. But I'm actually going to use some of these other questions because I think they might also be relevant to Mary. So the one thing that struck me, Mary, when you were speaking is, how on earth do you manage to do a PhD, run a charity, and do this project with business at the same time?
Well, it's saying really, is it something you're passionate in and you're really committed to, and because it's all linked. So it's not like I'm working on 3 disjointed pieces of work. You know, what I do with the charity, what I do with the university through my PhD studies, and the collaboration, they're all very much linked. So, you know, it works well for me.
And I think another thing, I think if I've understood you right, is that you said in the past you've naturally been drawn more to work with charities, set up your own charity. So when you first started to think about working with the private sector, did you have any reservations or concerns about how that might work?
Yeah, I did. Because, you know, when you're working in the field of domestic violence and abuse, it is hard to think of, you know, private sector organisations that would fit. But, you know, I just had to think outside of the norm, really. I mean, now I look back, there are a number of different ways I could have gone. You know, I could have worked directly with vets, but I didn't have that expertise that Wendy had. So that's really benefited me. I could have gone to animal behaviourists. There were lots of opportunities, because what we're really trying to do is equip people that work with animals, so vets, to identify non-accidental injury, to start to have those conversations. Is that really what happened to your animal? You know, and are you okay? You know, so the opportunities are out there. You've just got to look for them.
And we've had a question here from Natalie, which I think does relate to what you're saying there, because it's a very sensitive area. So the question from Natalie is, are there organisations that you wouldn't want sponsorship from?
Absolutely, yes. So yes, that there are. It has to be that right ethical and moral fit for my research, which is it from the feminist perspective. You know, dealing with the topic of domestic violence and abuse, it's really important in my collaboration with Wendy that we're on the same page with that, because, you know, I'm very passionate about how the findings are presented, and I've got a duty to victim survivors that have participated in the research. So yeah, absolutely, you know, that alignment with ethics is very important.
Brilliant. And same question that someone put to Sam is that I think, Mary, you've got a fairly short amount of time, you know, really, for this project. Where do you see it might go in the future?
I think it's just the start, actually. So it's exciting how everything's just slotted into place time-wise. You know, so the ABC, the collaboration came towards the end of my PhD research, so it's a great opportunity for me to share my findings. I'd like to think that I could go on and do more work with Wendy, that this is just a start, because there is so much to do in the area. So who knows at this stage.
Oh, thank you. That's great. So if anyone thinks of any more questions for Mary as we go through, then just put them in and we can always come back to them, because it can sometimes be hard to think off the top of your head, but do put in questions. So now I would like to go to our third topic, which is clarity on what the collaboration is trying to achieve. I don't think that was quite the most elegant topic title that I've managed to come up with, but Colin, I think you'll be able to give us some thoughts from your current projects with the Community Energy Organisation.
Sure, thank you, Ruth. So clarity, I guess, is about managing expectations. And I think, as Sam and Mary already mentioned, that it helps to have people within organizations that understand what academia is about, especially as Sam mentioned, the example of having somebody with a PhD within the organization so they can understand the academic process. This has also been the case with South East London Community Energy. The contact person there, she has a PhD in neurolinguistics, and it helps with somebody with such an academic background to be able to understand what academics can provide, but also with a clear understanding of what the limitations are, because there's often, or there can be, a certain expectation that there's some kind of academic wizardry, you know, that we can come in and we can do something with our magic wand and then something will happen. I think it's quite important to make sure that there are certain things that we can be quite good at. For example, if there's a reasonably good data set, we might be able to crunch some numbers, but we can't just pull something out of a hat. So I think it's really important to make sure that this is understood by all sides. Thankfully, this is also the case with the other organization that I'm working with. That's Energize Sussex Coast. Our contact person there, Richard, he used to work actually for the Environmental Change Institute at Oxford that I also work for. So both organizations that I'm partnering with the two PhD students at the University of Bristol as well, we all have a clear understanding of where we stand, what we can provide, and also a realistic understanding in terms of what can be done within a 3-month period, given that we're all working on this about, on average, 1 day a week. Seems like quite a lot, 20 working days at the outset, but, like in practice, that's, what is that, 7.5 hours a day. So that's not really that much that you can actually do. And a lot of the time is spent actually trying to figure out what the data is about before you can actually start distilling information and then collectively decide on the kind of outputs. Now, again, fortunate enough, because these people that we're collaborating with have a background in academia and so on, they're quite keen on outputs to be directed at a fairly high level. So they're not just, they don't just have an interest in our output being relevant to the company. They also want our output to be policy relevant, because they see this opportunity of connecting with academia as a means of reaching a wider audience, as in an audience that it would normally struggle to reach. So policymakers and regulators, for example. And they understand that as academics, we probably have better access points to academia, to policy making and to regulators and so on. So if that's clear, then there's certainly a lot of added value that such collaborations can provide if it is obvious that we as an academic institution, we have a different set of links. We have a better network into policy making, for example, compared to the businesses. They're more integrated in the business world. And so in this case, both sides can benefit from our respective expertise. The other point, I guess, about clarity is that I guess we're in the process of reimagining universities as civic universities. So to a certain extent, some academics will be engaging more and more with the public sector. And there's this understanding that comes, I think, out of kind of smart cities language that we're seeing from the US, this idea of triple and quadruple helixes. This implies that instead of public-private partnerships, we're increasingly seeing universities also playing a role through research and development originally, but increasingly also through the social sciences. And we see a lot more of that now if we add community organizations as well in quadruple helix constellations. I believe we see a lot more of that moving forward. And University of Bristol, for example, is engaged with a lot of research within the city, which involves all these different strands. And I think the university will need to be much clearer in terms of what it can provide, but also in terms of its limitations, in terms of what researchers can do, but also make it very clear in terms of what cannot be done. Because sometimes for businesses, it's the day-to-day that just tends to blind them regarding the kind of long-term trends that an academic perspective might be able to provide. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. It's so interesting what you were saying there, Colin, because when you started it was, I love that phrase, academic wizardry, and then you talked about some very practical things, which I would put under sort of a project management sort of hat, you know, and for the businesses they're working day to day. But it's interesting, and other people have found it interesting too, to show that there's a lot riding on some of these projects, because it's not only you and the company working on this project, but it sounds like the company's got massive expectations and ambitions, and universities have similar big civic ambitions. So Sally's just commented, it's really interesting to hear how businesses value academia as a route to policymakers. So I think that's a very interesting point. Participants, please put in any further questions, some questions coming in for Colin. And Laura, I will come back to your question. I haven't forgotten it, I've noted it, but I would like everyone to respond to this. So Colin, question for you from Natalie is, how did you balance academic need versus the business as usual or business?
Good question. I think as an academic, one is generally privileged by being able to take a step back and have a ponder about where these organizations stand relative, for example, to policymakers. So especially if you're working with charitable organizations, and I'm sure Mary would be able to also say something about that. A lot of these organizations, they usually only survive from one pot of funding to the next, and they're constantly putting out fires. So it's really difficult for these organizations to actually look beyond the next source of income. Whereas as academics, hopefully, we're not just pursuing the next source of income, although some might argue we're in the same boat increasingly. But we have the opportunity to take a step back and to make sure that we can observe things within maybe kind of a longer time frame, and to put things into a different perspective. So I think the key point really is that maintaining an academic perspective, and also not necessarily responding directly to a request from the business. Always take your time to reflect on where a request lies within the grand scheme of things, and then respond with a reflective answer. That creates also clarity in terms of how responsive an academic can be to a business need, and also tends to put things into a more kind of long scale, big picture perspective. I hope that kind of answers the question.
Thank you. One thing I've forgotten to say is, of course, panel, you could ask each other questions. So Sam, Mary and Colin, if you have a burning question you wish to ask another member of the panel, wave your hand now and I'll bring you in. Okay, if you think of any questions, let me know. So Colin, I just want to stay with you for the moment, because one thing I'm interested in is that you have a sort of dual identity, as in you are an academic, obviously, but I understand that you also have a non-executive directorship at one of those companies that you talked about. And so you've got that sort of insider's perspective, if I may put it in that way. I wonder if you could just tell us a bit more about how that is for you. Is it useful? What's the difference in perspective?
Yes, I guess my career has been slightly unusual in that I have kind of straddled the public sector, industry and university in the last 15 years of my career. So I've worked for government, for example. I've worked for the then Department of Energy and Climate Change. I've worked for energy efficiency consultancies. I worked for community energy companies. And I'm now indeed a non-executive director of a company called Community Energy South, which is an umbrella organization for community energy businesses. And two of our member organizations are in fact Southeast London Community Energy and Energize Sussex Coast. So through my directorship, I became aware of these organizations' needs. And so I got in touch with their directors, and then we decided to apply for funding. And we actually found this process of applying for funding so useful that we subsequently teamed up with a lot of other organizations, and we applied for Horizon 2020 funding for mitigating household energy poverty. So what just started off as a relatively small ABC pot of funding has now evolved into a huge funding bid worth, I think, just over 2 million euros, I think, in total.
Wow, that's good to hear. Excellent. Okay, we're going to change tack slightly and ask a very practical question. And this question is to each panel member. So I'll go Sam, Mary and Colin in turn. The question is, Sam, what did the ESRC Accelerating Business Collaboration funding pay for in your?
In my case, it's basically paying for me to be bought out of my PhD time. So it enables me to do the work alongside my PhD to some extent, but also enables the business to, as I mentioned, kind of carry out some work that they see is really important, they wouldn't be able to do otherwise. So yeah, that's kind of, that's what the funding pot for me is paying for.
Thank you. And Mary, what's it paying for you?
For me, it's paying for my time to undergo this collaboration, and it's paying for the resources that we produce. So the training materials, the film that we're making. So yeah, that's what it's paying for.
And Colin, same question to you. What's it paying for your project?
So as part of my project, I've hired 2 of our PhD students, and they're working on average 1 day a week, I think for 20 weeks in total. And they're entitled to do that under kind of short-term contracts. So that means they get this money and they do this research additional to their PhD, which in some cases has actually been quite handy because some PhDs have more or less been put on hold because of the COVID-19 crisis. And in this case, we have been able to progress on this despite this because we have access to company data. So this is quite neat for the participating PhD students because they get a bit of bridge finance. For me, it is time. It is my actual time that gets paid for. Given that I'm on temporary university research contracts, now I have an argument in hand for the university potentially to extend my contract maybe a month or 2 at the end. I should also mention that we got some match funding for this research. So through my directorship of Community Energy South, we liaise with lots of organizations that provide funding, and one of them is Scotia Gas Network, SGN. They run gas networks, and they also have a statutory mandate to address fuel poverty, and they've put aside some of their money to pay for the time and the resources of these community energy organizations to engage in this ABC, in this accelerating business collaboration. So that means these community energy organizations / charities, they get their time funded by SGN, and the academic time gets funded through the Economic and Social Research Council.
Thank you. So we've got some more questions coming in. So I'll put this one to you first, Sam, but also I think Colin and possibly Mary might want to answer it. So just briefly, because we've got a few more coming in. So Sam, this is a question from Eduarda. Sam, what are your thoughts regarding pitching the importance of social sciences to businesses that live and breathe quantitative results and numerical indicators?
Yeah, interesting. So HomeLink, they work in the space of artificial intelligence and machine learning. So they're very much a business that whose product focuses on using quantitative data to produce their insights. They are in themselves a business for social purpose. So their insights are and their product is for social homes to improve the living conditions and to empower social residents with their data. So I think that is probably quite an important method of doing this. So showing, either putting an argument to the business to kind of highlight the social impact of their business practice, or if they already have that, then that's great. And increasingly businesses are becoming more aware of environmental and social issues. I think there's recently actually there's the government has brought in new measures to kind of deliver more value to society. So this is more public sector, but if you can find little kind of reasons why bringing in this kind of idea of social purpose into your research bid and informing the business of that, if they might not know already, can kind of add value and kind of emphasis to why your project might be worthwhile to them. I guess the other thing as well is thinking purely financially about this. If you can bring research into them and funding for a project into them that you believe can give them value, then I think that is just a benefit for them, and they need to kind of understand that you're it's not necessarily you're paying for your own time. Basically, it's at no cost to them, and if you can explain those benefits to them, then I think there's definitely something to be said about.
Thank you, Mary. I don't know if this question is so relevant. So yes, please, your thoughts on that.
This is a really good question, actually, and it's a question. So it's a really big issue. So very often, working in the field of domestic abuse, being a social scientist, we get asked about the prevalence. So how many people does this affect? And certainly when we're working alongside vets, they like to know the numbers, the numerical data, and it's about a balance. So yes, the numbers can give us some insight. So within my research, within my participant group, those numbers can give some insight. But actually, when we look at the wider context of the interview data, and what victim survivors are telling us, it's about getting that across in a really compelling way to shift the focus away from the numbers, which just give us a little bit of insight, but actually we need to look at the whole context.
Thank you. Now, Colin, I'm going to skip to a different question to ask you because we've got a few more questions. So I want to make sure we address them all. So this is an interesting question. So Colin, in your perspective, are your projects considered to be consultancy, collaborative research, or contract research, or something else? Now, for those who are from the business community, each of those terms has a specific meaning within the university sector. They're bits of jargon that we use to describe collaborations. Obviously, everybody knows what consultancy is, but collaborative and contract research have specific meanings. Colin, I don't know if you have experience with this, but do you feel it's more a consultancy activity or some sort of collaborative research activity?
Yeah, I actually have consultancy experience as well, and I feel like this is more collaborative research. In consultancy, it's usually pre-established, like there's usually a set of objectives that one wants to achieve. Whereas in this case, there was collaboration and the co-development of the application. And there's ongoing discussions in terms of what the actual output will be. So it's quite dynamic. I mean, the same can also be true of a consultancy, because you might start off to do something and then they realize what your skills are, and then you might end up doing something else. But in this case, it feels a lot more co-developed, the outcome. So that's why I consider it more of a business research collaboration. I think like the name Accelerating Business Collaboration really encapsulates it very well, rather than a consultancy in the classical sense.
Thank you. So here's a question to Sam and Mary as PhD students. Were your supervisors supportive of you doing this collaboration? So let's start with Mary.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was my supervisor that first told me about the collaboration and the opportunity. So they were fully supportive of my application, and I'm actually supervised by an early career researcher as well, who's been absolutely brilliant, because she knows a great deal more than me about some of the day-to-day aspects of a collaboration and setting them up with the university. So yeah, very supportive.
Thank you. And Sam?
Yeah, so my supervisors were supportive. I had to convince them to some extent. So I had to put across kind of why it would be beneficial for my PhD, why it's good use of my time. And yeah, so they were part of the process in terms of the application and making sure that I put that across, that it was, it was relevant to my research. If I kind of look at it more broadly though, my main supervisor, she has been very kind of influential in me pursuing these kind of opportunities. So whether it had been, earlier on it was maybe teaching, but things beyond the research itself, the PhD research itself, making us into, widening the skill set. And yeah, so there was kind of something instilled in me, I guess, to kind of pursue these opportunities.
Thank you. There's a question from Laura, which I have deliberately been leaving, not because it's not important, but because I thought there's several ways to answer this. So it's interesting, Laura, you were asking about good social science case studies. And this is actually a similar question came up in the previous workshop that I was involved with, which was from a business person saying, do the universities have these sort of case studies? And somebody shared a really nice website link. I forget what that is, but we could share it again with everybody because it had a really interesting breadth of case studies. So that's not the answer to your question, but that was just a bit of a flag. So the question to the panelists is, so I'll start with Colin. Colin, obviously you said from your background, you've had a lot of connections with business, but were there any other people or case studies from the social sciences that inspired you to undertake this business collaboration?
I guess I've been fortunate, as I said, to have had these close links with business before. So, for example, last year this was again to a certain extent a spin-off of my non-executive directorship of Community Energy South, that I was working on a project which is called Riding Sunbeams. We're powering trains with solar power, and actually managed to do the world's first demonstration of solar powered trains in the UK. So I think I've been inspired really by my business engagement. But now that I've been engaging that myself, I've actually been noticing more and more of that around the university. Of course, it's common practice in the more physical sciences, especially among engineers. But among social sciences, once I guess one is aware of the possibilities of collaboration, one finds more and more of this happening, and one also finds more and more colleagues that are engaging in this kind of business collaboration. So I think one naturally kind of establishes a certain kind of business or social science and business ecosystem once one has engaged in it, and it becomes easier the more one engages with such collaborations.
Thank you. So I can see we're coming up to 5 o'clock. So one thing I'd like to ask everybody is that we'd really find it so helpful if you could just fill in a very quick questionnaire at the end, and that will come up on the screen when we close the session. So if you could resist the temptation to shut your screen down, even if you have to go away and make a cup of tea, just wait just one moment, or just leave your screen open, and then that'll direct you to the feedback form, which we would so much appreciate. Thank you. Fiona, thank you. You've put in some very useful links. Now I'm just going to copy those links, and we'll be able to share them with you afterwards. Just bear with me. I'll stick those links into the slides that we don't have many slides, but my contact details will be shared with you. In fact, I will thank the panel in just a moment, and then I'll share my email address and phone number. And if anybody would like to get in touch with me or anyone else in the panel, then please do so. And feel free to ask any more questions or whatever you want to know. So I will, without further ado, thank our fantastic panel. I really appreciate your time today. I think we've had such a fantastic breadth of ideas, and your experiences have been so useful, and I hope they've been useful to our participants. So a massive thanks to Sam Collier, who's working with HomeLink and a PhD student at the University of Bristol. Massive thanks to yourself, Mary, who is also a PhD student and running a charity and doing everything else, working at the University of Bristol, and Colin Nalden, who is a Vice Chancellor's Fellow at the University of Bristol. And hopefully you're seeing that we're also having thanks coming in. So thank you so much to the panelists. Thanks, yeah, several people saying thank you. So I'm really glad that you all enjoyed it. So please put your feedback into that form, and I will now share my screen, which has got my email address and phone number. And thank you everybody for taking part, and see you again soon. Hold on, let me share screen. How's it going? Bear with me. Here we go. So hopefully you can see that. If you can't, I'll read it out. My email address is ruth.welters, WELTERS @bristol.ac.uk. My work mobile number is 07791 520 750. And thanks everybody.